The millionaire's daughter married a waiter, and what her father did when he found out left her in shock. Charlotte Langford was an 18-year-old who grew up in a luxurious mansion. Her father, Marcus, was an authoritarian man who only cared about power and increasing his fortune. He controlled Charlotte in everything, even her choice of clothes. She was like a prisoner in that house, always under his watch. The only place she was still allowed to go was to her father's restaurants. One day, Marcus ordered his housekeeper to call Charlotte to his office. Charlotte was on the verge of a breakdown as she walked toward her father's office. Whenever Marcus summoned her, she knew it meant he wanted her to do something against her will. "Come in, Charlotte." His voice was firm on the other side, so controlled it seemed to cut through the air. She entered, swallowing the tension that grew with every step. Marcus was in his usual spot, behind a massive mahogany desk that practically swallowed him up. In front of him, stacks of documents, files, and contracts were carefully arranged, a physical testament to the empire he had built and was so proud of. His calculating eyes examined her with the same coldness he reserved for his most compliant executives. "Father, you wanted to see me?" Her voice came out cautiously, almost a whisper. Marcus nodded. "Charlotte, you will marry Henry Porter in 2 weeks. With this marriage, you will cement an alliance that will benefit both our families. It's a strategic decision, one that represents a legacy and immense power for all of us." Charlotte stared at him, trying to stay calm while processing what she had just heard. She already knew Henry, an ambitious man focused solely on his status. To Marcus, he was perfect. A wealthy heir who also believed alliances were built on money and influence, not feelings. "Father, I don't love Henry. I barely know him. How can I marry someone I don't love?" Charlotte's voice trembled as she held back tears. "Feelings are a dispensable luxury, Charlotte. The love you believe in is a fantasy. You've had everything: education, comfort, access to the best life has to offer. It's time you repay that." Marcus cut her off with his rigid tone. Charlotte felt a crushing weight in her chest. It wasn't the first time he'd reminded her that the life she had was, in his eyes, a favor. But this time, he was demanding payment in a currency she didn't want to and couldn't give. She felt humiliated, trapped in the life her father wanted for her. The person in front of her wasn't her father. He was a calculating, ruthless man who seemed incapable of seeing her as his daughter. "I can't do this." The words slipped out almost unintentionally, filled with a defiance she didn't even know she had. "If you can't do this, then you can't be a Langford." His voice was like a judge's hammer. "And if you continue with this idea, Charlotte, you'll be disinherited and left with nothing. Everything you have, everything you've become, is because of my efforts. Remember that. I hope you consider the weight of your words. Remember, the world outside this house is not kind." Stunned and still reeling from Marcus's threatening words, Charlotte left the office. She needed some space, so she went to her father's restaurant, the only place she was allowed to go. Charlotte entered the restaurant and chose a table in the back, away from curious eyes. As she sat down, she noticed someone watching her. He was tall, with brown hair and an attentive gaze. He wore a waiter's uniform, but there was something about him, an ease and confidence that caught her attention. He approached with a discreet smile, holding a notepad. "Good evening, Miss Langford," he said calmly, clearly recognizing her. "My name is Dylan. How can I help you tonight?" Dylan's tone wasn't submissive or fearful like many others who served her. Instead, it felt genuine. Charlotte felt a wave of surprise and curiosity. Used to dealing with people who only saw her last name, she found herself observing Dylan with interest. "Just water for now," she replied, trying to hide her nervousness. After a chaotic day, the simplicity of his service was like a balm. As he walked away to get her order, Charlotte looked around the room. Despite all the luxury of the restaurant, the conversation seemed empty, the laughter forced, and everything she heard felt like part of a staged performance. Within minutes, Dylan returned with her water, and to her surprise, he lingered, as if waiting for something. "I hope everything is all right, Miss Langford," he said with a slight smile. "It's unusual to see you here alone. Is there anything I can do to help?" That offer of help, though unexpected, caught her off guard. For a moment, Charlotte wanted to open up about the argument she had with her father, about the feeling of being trapped in a life she didn't want. But she held back, It seemed unwise. Instead, she decided to talk a little. "Actually, yes," she began, hesitantly. "Today was a tough day." It was the first time she'd ever said that to anyone outside her close circle. Dylan just nodded, encouraging her to go on. He had a way about him that felt trustworthy, without rushing or judging, something rare in Charlotte's world. "Sometimes, I feel like my life was planned out in every detail, and I never had a choice." Charlotte looked away toward the table. "It's like everything is already decided, and nothing I do really matters." Dylan listened carefully, not interrupting. He seemed to understand that feeling of helplessness, which made Charlotte feel at ease, almost as if she was talking to an old friend. "You know," he said after a short pause, "people often forget they're more than the plans others make for them. It might not be easy, but there's always a choice, even if it's just about what you'll do today." The simplicity of his words touched her in a way she hadn't expected. As he spoke, Charlotte felt a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. That exchange, however brief and casual, seemed to offer a glimpse of something new. Dylan didn't see her as a means to an end or an alliance. He saw her as someone with her own struggles and feelings. Throughout the rest of the evening, Dylan went back and forth, serving other tables, but whenever he could, he stopped by hers, giving her a brief smile or a knowing look. And Charlotte, despite everything, felt an odd and unexpected peace. The weight of her conversation with Marcus seemed to have lifted, replaced by a flicker of hope. By the end of the evening, Charlotte was already feeling lighter. When Dylan handed her the check, he gave her one last smile, and Charlotte found herself wishing that conversation could have lasted longer. She knew she'd have to return to the mansion and face reality. But now, there was a spark of something new and unknown, a silent promise that life could offer more than pre-planned choices. After that night, Charlotte couldn't get Dylan out of her mind. Something about the way he'd listened to her, without judgment, without any ulterior motive, made her feel human, not just an extension of her father's plans. It was like he'd stirred something forgotten inside her. A deep desire for freedom, for authenticity. In the days that followed, Charlotte found reasons to return to the restaurant. She avoided peak hours, preferring late afternoons when it was quieter, and she had a better chance of seeing Dylan without drawing attention from staff or other customers. With each visit, their conversations became more relaxed and personal. Dylan began sharing details of his own life, about growing up in a modest part of town, the jobs he'd done to help his mother after his father passed, and his dream of one day opening a small restaurant. These conversations were a whole new world for Charlotte. She found herself drawn to Dylan's practical outlook on life, and most of all, his determination to reach his goals without anyone's help. He was, in every way, the opposite of Henry, and the people Charlotte had been forced to associate with. Yet, the sense of peace and happiness that came with talking to Dylan was also matched by a constant sense of anxiety. She knew that if her father found out, he'd force her to keep her distance from him. One afternoon, after a longer conversation than usual, Dylan finally asked a question Charlotte had feared from the start. "Why do you come here alone? Don't take it the wrong way. I just wonder what someone like you looks for in a place like this at this hour." Charlotte hesitated, searching for the right words. For the first time, she felt she could be honest, even if only partly. "Dylan, you were the first person I've really talked to in a long time. It's like here, I can just be Charlotte, not the Langford name." He nodded slowly, with a look of understanding that surprised her. "You know, to me, you're just Charlotte, and if it helps, you always will be." Her heart raced. There was something in those words that made her want to believe that there was, in fact, a place for her outside her father's empire. Charlotte didn't want to let herself hope, but she couldn't ignore the pull of that world. Dylan seemed to open up for her. A world where she was free to choose. After that afternoon, their meetings became a secret between them. Charlotte began making excuses to leave the mansion, always careful not to raise any suspicion. Every meeting with Dylan felt like an escape to the world she longed for. A place where she didn't have to be someone else. With him, she felt alive. Time flew by whenever they were together. They walked through hidden parks, visited local markets, And once, Dylan took her to an old bookstore where they spent hours talking about anything that came to mind. With him, Charlotte felt like she had the freedom to choose her own path, a feeling she had never experienced before. During one of their outings, Charlotte confided something to Dylan she'd never thought she'd tell anyone. "My father, he wants me to marry a man I barely know, someone I don't love. Henry Porter. To him, it's just a business deal." Dylan's expression changed. He was silent for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "Charlotte, I don't know everything about your life, but no one should force you into something like this. It doesn't matter what you have or who you are." He looked at her with sincerity and strength. "You have the right to make your own choices. We all do." Dylan's words echoed within her. Over the weeks, she found herself constantly thinking about them. She continued visiting the restaurant, and Charlotte started to crave those meetings more and more, feeling a twinge of sadness each time they said goodbye. That night, as she returned home, Charlotte made a decision. Something inside her had shifted, something not even her father's control could contain. It was clear Dylan was the anchor that helped her stand firm, that reminded her she deserved to be in charge of her own life. She didn't know what this meant for her future, but she knew she needed Dylan close. And above all, she knew that, for the first time, she was ready to face any consequence. The announcement of the engagement party made Charlotte's blood run cold. Marcus didn't care about her opinion. To him, it was just an inconvenient detail. He treated her like a puppet, and now he was pulling the strings to tie her forever to a man she barely knew and would never love. The party was set for the next month, and Charlotte felt like she was sentenced to an inescapable fate. After a nearly sleepless night, Charlotte's decision became inevitable. She needed to see Dylan. With trembling hands, she sent him a simple message. "Please meet me today. I need you." The reply came quickly and straightforward. "I'll be waiting where we always meet." She left the mansion without looking back, slipping through the shadows like a ghost. The park where they met at night was nearly empty, and Charlotte found Dylan already there, leaning against a tree with a serious, watchful expression. When he saw her, his eyes softened, but he noticed the distress on her face. Without hesitation, he opened his arms, and Charlotte ran to him, feeling a momentary relief, as if that embrace was the only place she could breathe. "Dylan, I can't take it anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My father is already planning the engagement party. He set the date, and I feel like I'm trapped in a cell I can never escape from." Dylan held her shoulders, gently pulling her back to look into his eyes. "Charlotte, it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to do this just because he wants it." She let out a bitter laugh, feeling despair bubbling to the surface. "Do you think I haven't tried? He's made it clear what happens if I refuse. He threatens me, he'd disown me, he'd destroy anything that makes me happy." Dylan was silent for a moment, his face hardening as he took in her words. "Charlotte, what do you want? Forget what he wants, forget what everyone expects of you. What do you really want?" The question struck her like an arrow. For a moment, Charlotte was speechless, the weight of all the pressure collapsing in a single instant. She had lived her entire life under expectations. She had always been the Langford daughter, never just Charlotte. But as she looked into Dylan's eyes, a fragile but real spark ignited within her. "I want to choose. I want a life where I have the right to say no, where I can be with someone I love, someone like you." Dylan looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. Without saying a word, he held her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. And Charlotte felt the warmth and security of that connection. "Then come with me, Charlotte. I can't promise an easy life, but I can promise I'll never force you into anything. You'll be free to be whoever you want, and I'll be there with you. Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. They won't get it. Type hamburger in the comments. Only those who got this far will understand." She swallowed hard, her heart beating so fast it felt like a drum pounding in her ears. A decision was beginning to form inside her, growing like an unstoppable wave. What he was saying was exactly what she'd always wanted, something she'd never believed possible. The words left her mouth before she could think twice. "Then, let's get married, Dylan. Tonight, before he has a chance to lock me in for good." Dylan's eyes widened, caught off guard by the sudden proposal, but he only hesitated for a second. He took her face in his hands and with a determined smile said, "Then that's what we'll do. I'm with you, no matter what." The decision was so bold that it made Charlotte tremble, but fear didn't stop her. With courage fueled by years of control and submission, Charlotte and Dylan headed together to a small chapel on the outskirts of town, where Dylan knew a pastor performed quiet ceremonies. Each mile they drove took her further from the Langford mansion and everything her father represented, and the weight on her shoulders began to lift. The chapel was modest, almost invisible compared to the luxury she was used to. But to Charlotte, it represented a freedom so real she could hardly hold back her tears. That night, under the soft glow of stained glass windows, she became Charlotte Rowe. In that moment, she felt as if every chain holding her had finally broken. At the end of the brief ceremony, they walked out of the chapel as husband and wife, and Charlotte felt reborn. For the first time, her life was truly her own. She knew her father wouldn't take the news easily, but that no longer mattered. As scary as the future was, she knew she could face it now, with someone who saw her for who she really was. There, under the night sky, with Dylan by her side, Charlotte took a deep breath, savoring the air of freedom. The news hit Marcus Langford like a public humiliation. Finding out that Charlotte had secretly married a waiter ignited a rage so intense that everything around him felt meaningless. To him, it was an unforgivable betrayal. The Langford heir, married to a man without money, without status, without any strategic value. His daughter, the key to his expansion of power, now joined to a nobody who threatened to disgrace the family name. Charlotte was summoned to the office, but this time it felt more like a courtroom than a family meeting. When she entered, Marcus stood behind his desk, as rigid as a statue. His eyes burned with barely contained fury. "I hope you know the humiliation you've put me through," he began, his voice low but dripping with venom. "Marrying an employee, someone of no value, in secret? Is this what you consider an act of courage, Charlotte?" She tried to hold her ground. "Father, I didn't marry Dylan to humiliate you. I married him because I love him, and because for once I wanted something for myself." Marcus gave a bitter smile, and the look he threw at her was pure disdain. "You think love will sustain you? That this feeling is enough? Fine. Since you're so sure of it, let's see how much this love can withstand." He leaned in, his face close to hers. "I'll make sure every step you and this husband take together is a living hell." Charlotte felt her stomach drop, but forced herself to keep her voice steady. "You can take everything, Father, but that won't make me give up." He let out a cold laugh. "Take everything? Charlotte, you don't even know what it means to lose everything. But you will learn." In the days that followed, Marcus kept his promise. He not only cut off all of Charlotte's cards and financial access, it quickly became clear that he had no intention of stopping there. First, Dylan was fired from the restaurant where he worked, a place Marcus had suddenly purchased, with the sole intention of getting him out of a job. The news came without warning, like a slap. Dylan came home, his eyes tired but trying to hide his frustration. "It's okay, Charlotte," he said, gripping her hand tightly. "We'll find another way. I'm not going to let this get to us." But the next job Dylan found lasted less than a week. After he started working at a small cafe, they were informed the place had been closed for legal issues. They soon discovered Marcus had used his connections to pressure the owner into shutting down temporarily. He was relentless and everywhere, like a shadow hovering over every attempt they made to move forward. Each new scheme for Marcus felt like another knife in Charlotte's chest. The modest life they were trying to build was constantly sabotaged. Every promising opportunity mysteriously disappeared, and the tension was starting to suffocate them. Soon, Charlotte began to fear opening any door or answering any call, worried about the next trap her father might have set. The savings Dylan had built up gradually dwindled, and uncertainty started to wear down their hope. Charlotte could see the weight of the situation on Dylan's shoulders as he spent more hours away from home, taking any temporary work not controlled by Marcus. But her father was relentless, always finding a way to interfere. One night, after yet another frustrating job search, Dylan came home with a dark look in his eyes and a weary expression. "Charlotte, I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," he said in a low, exhausted voice. "Your father seems to have the power to crush us at every turn." She hugged him tightly, fighting back her own distress. "Dylan, we'll find a way out. I don't care what he does as long as I'm with you." But even as she said it, she knew Marcus was determined to destroy every part of the life they were trying to build. He didn't just want to disinherit her. He wanted to see her completely broken. The situation continued to worsen. The following month, Marcus managed to interfere even with the lease on their small apartment. One day, the landlord showed up, nervous, asking them to leave within a week. They had no choice but to move out, with no clear idea of where they would go. For the first time, Dylan seemed on the verge of giving up. In the silence of a late night, as they sat together, he opened up, exhausted. "I never wanted you to go through this, Charlotte. I thought that together we could face anything, but he's like a monster. It feels like every step we take, he's there to crush us." Charlotte took his hands, feeling a mix of desperation and a simmering anger inside her. She knew her father was testing every limit, pushing them to give up. He wanted her to beg, to surrender, to humble herself and ask to return. "Dylan, he wants to break us. He wants me to give in. But I won't. I won't give him that satisfaction." Yet, as their circumstances closed in around them, Charlotte knew she would have to do something. With every new act of sabotage, Marcus made it clear he was willing to take the conflict to its limits. And that night, she resolved not to let Marcus destroy the life she and Dylan were trying to create. She didn't know how to confront him directly, but she knew she had to find a way to escape his reach. Seeing the resolve in her eyes, Dylan squeezed her hand and whispered, "If it's a fight, Charlotte, I'm with you, to the end." With what little they managed to save after leaving the apartment, Charlotte and Dylan moved to a distant neighborhood, renting a small, simple room in a shared house with other tenants. It was almost unrecognizable from the life Charlotte had known, surrounded by luxury and security. But with Dylan by her side, she felt closer to true freedom than she ever had. Still, the financial strain was growing tighter. Every attempt to find work was a struggle, and Marcus seemed to have eyes and ears everywhere, always finding ways to block any opportunity they found. With money running low, they began taking on odd cleaning jobs and small deliveries. Everything felt precarious, and Charlotte felt that each step required extra caution to avoid drawing her father's attention. At this point, the fatigue was overwhelming, not only physically but emotionally. The constant pressure of dodging Marcus's interference and the uncertainty of a life they could lose at any moment weighed heavily on them. One evening, Dylan came home late, his clothes dusty, and his expression deeply exhausted. "Today, I barely finished the deliveries," he said, sitting beside Charlotte, who was trying to calculate the bills they would need to cover next month. "I've been thinking, what if we moved to another city?" Charlotte looked at him, surprised. "Do you think that would help? He has connections everywhere, and he knows that wherever I go, I'll be trying to start over." Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. They won't understand. Type popcorn in the comments. Only those who made it this far will get it. Dylan nodded, but his expression was firm. "I know, but we can't just stay here, cornered, waiting for the next hit. We need to go somewhere we can work without being chased around every corner." He held Charlotte's hands. "I'll do whatever it takes for us to have a life together, far away from his shadow." Charlotte knew he was right. Staying here was like waiting for a fight they couldn't win. They made the decision that night, and with what they'd saved, they bought tickets to a smaller town, hoping they'd have more anonymity there. The new town was modest, and they managed to rent a small studio, simple but cozy. Charlotte found a temporary job as a waitress, and Dylan got work in a warehouse, where the hours were long, but it helped cover the bills. For the first time in months, they felt a little safer, free from the constant threat of Marcus over them. But the peace didn't last long. In less than 2 weeks, Dylan got a call from the warehouse management, letting him know his contract was suddenly ending. It was the same pattern as before. Marcus had found out where they were and was starting to shut down every door they opened. That night, when Dylan returned to the studio, he was furious, his eyes burning with a mix of exhaustion and anger. "I don't know what to do anymore, Charlotte. He's not going to stop. No matter where we go, he finds a way to break us down." Charlotte, who had tried to stay strong despite everything, felt a pang of despair spreading through her chest. But instead of giving in, something inside her hardened. She'd lost count of how many times she'd imagined facing her father directly, but always held back, feeling powerless. Now, though, after everything she'd been through with Dylan, she knew she couldn't keep running. If Marcus wanted a fight, she would give it all she had. "He'll only stop when he realizes he can't control us anymore," Charlotte said, her voice full of determination. "Let's stop running, Dylan. If he wants a showdown, we'll face him." Dylan looked at her, surprised, but he nodded. "I'm with you, Charlotte. Whatever it takes, we'll fight to the end." The next day, Charlotte went to a local law firm and explained her situation to a trustworthy attorney. She was determined to get Marcus out of her life once and for all, and the attorney agreed to help, warning that it would be a long, complicated process, but could lead to a restraining order, limiting his actions and interference. Marcus did not react well to the summons he received shortly after. Enraged, he threatened to take the fight to the very end, using all his power and money to make things as hard as possible for Charlotte and Dylan. It was an exhausting period, filled with veiled threats and constant pressure, but now Charlotte had something he couldn't destroy, her own willpower. Despite all the obstacles, Charlotte and Dylan pressed on, and every day beside him, even in the hard times, proved that their choice to fight had been the right one. They were tired, worn out, but together, and nothing could take that from them. Months passed since Charlotte and Dylan began the legal process against Marcus, and although the struggles remained intense, they slowly felt they were regaining control of their lives. They knew every small victory chipped away at Marcus's relentless hold, but he always seemed to find a new way to retaliate. However, Charlotte and Dylan discovered something that would change the course of this battle forever. Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. They won't get it. Type popcorn in the comments. Only those who made it this far will understand. On a rainy afternoon, while reviewing documents with the attorney, Charlotte found a hidden detail in one of Marcus's business contracts that had been made public. Something sparked her curiosity, and she asked the attorney to look into it further. Within days, he uncovered a web of questionable investments, properties purchased in other people's names, and a string of businesses Marcus kept under the radar, supposedly to avoid taxes and gain even more control over his industry. "If this gets fully investigated, it could be a serious legal problem for your father," the attorney explained, with a thoughtful expression. "And if you can get a higher authority involved, there's a real chance he'll be forced to back off. Any public scandal involving his image and business could make him reconsider his pursuit of you two." The news hit Charlotte like a spark of hope. For the first time, she had something concrete against Marcus, something that might finally give her and Dylan a real chance to break free from the control he had over their lives. With the support of her lawyer, they decided to use this information as leverage. If Marcus kept interfering in their lives, his hidden network of businesses would be exposed. Marcus's reaction upon learning that his own daughter had evidence capable of ruining his reputation was explosive. He tried intimidating them with more legal threats, suggesting that the lawsuits Charlotte had filed against him had no chance of succeeding. But when he realized she was resolute, Marcus began to give in, albeit with a bitter resistance. In one of their tensest meetings, Marcus looked at Charlotte with a mix of disdain and surprise. "I underestimated your willingness to fight, Charlotte," he admitted in a cold voice. "But remember, by destroying my empire, you might also destroy any future I'd still be willing to give you." Charlotte lifted her chin, her expression unyielding. "I don't want your future, Dad. I want one I build myself, where I don't have to live under your threats and manipulation." As much as he hated to accept it, Marcus saw that his daughter was now someone he couldn't control. He found himself face to face with a determined Charlotte, no longer afraid of him, growing stronger with every challenge. Finally, Marcus gave a resigned nod. "All right, Charlotte, I'll back off." The words came out with a bitter tone, as though swallowing his own pride. That was the turning point. Marcus's retreat allowed Charlotte and Dylan to truly begin living. In time, Dylan secured a steady job at a small restaurant, where he was finally able to showcase his cooking skills. Together, they saved every penny, and with hard work and dedication, they eventually opened a small cafe, a dream they had shared from the start, though it always seemed so far away. In that cozy, modest space, they served each customer with the care and authenticity that had brought them together. Charlotte felt happier than ever, free to chart her own path, free from the chains of the past. One day, as they were closing the cafe, Dylan wrapped her in his arms and pulled her in for a gentle kiss. "You did it, Charlotte. No matter what comes, I know we'll face it together. You're the strongest person I know." She smiled, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "And I couldn't have done it without you, Dylan. You showed me what it really means to live." At last, Charlotte was free, and with Dylan by her side, she knew they had a future no one else could touch. The year that followed was transformative for Charlotte and Dylan. After all the struggles, the cafe they'd built together flourished, becoming a gathering place for the local community, and their lives finally felt peaceful and secure. Charlotte poured her heart into the cafe, while Dylan, who managed the kitchen, experimented with new recipes. They were happy and fulfilled, living the life they had chosen. And each day was proof that all the pain and sacrifice had been worth it. Then, a miracle came into their lives. Charlotte discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them with indescribable joy. For the first time, she felt everything was complete. She was creating her own family, something she and Dylan had built with love and courage. The pregnancy ushered in a new phase of peace and joy, and the couple eagerly awaited the arrival of their daughter, imagining her bright eyes and the future they could create together. But one day, as Charlotte was closing the cafe, a familiar figure appeared at the door. Marcus Langford, her father, was there. The air grew tense. Charlotte knew he was aware of her pregnancy. Even with the distance between them, he was still an influential man, and news always found its way to him. Now standing there, he looked older, more tired, and for the first time, he didn't carry that look of control and disdain. Instead, there was a different glint in his eyes. She hesitated but opened the door. Marcus entered, his face serious but not hostile. He sat down in a nearby chair and remained silent, as if searching for the right words. "Charlotte," he began, his voice rough, almost hesitant, "I heard about the child." She nodded, unsure what to expect, her heart pounding. She felt a mix of relief and fear, the same confusing emotions she always felt around him, but this time something was different. He seemed vulnerable. "I've made a lot of mistakes," Marcus went on, looking down at his hands. "My whole life, I thought I was protecting you. I thought I knew what was best, that my love for you meant securing your future my way. But I was blind to what you truly wanted. I see now that you don't need me to build your own happiness, and I realize I almost ruined everything trying to control you." Charlotte felt a lump in her throat. Hearing these words she'd always hoped for, was freeing her from a pain she'd carried for so long. Seeing her father admit this brought an unexpected peace. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Charlotte. I just want you to know that if there's anything I can do to be here for you, for your daughter, I would. This granddaughter, she's all the family I have left." Silence filled the air as Charlotte took it all in. She had never expected her father to admit his mistakes, and seeing him there, regretful and vulnerable, deeply moved her. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "I've spent so long accepting our past, moving forward. I built my life away from all this because I needed to live my own life without your control. But maybe I'm ready to let you be part of my family, as long as you respect our choices." Marcus's face softened, and she saw tears welling in his eyes, something she'd never seen before. "Thank you, Charlotte. It's more than I deserve." Months later, Charlotte gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom they named Amelia. Her arrival brought new light to their lives. Little Amelia was a mix of both her parents, with Dylan's sweet smile and Charlotte's deep eyes. She became the center of their lives, a constant source of joy and hope. To everyone's surprise, Marcus visited regularly to see his granddaughter, always discreet and respectful, with a humility that impressed Charlotte. She noticed a transformation in him. A man who once was rigid and unbending now charmed by Amelia's innocence, laughing and delighting in her every move. Holding her in his arms, he seemed more human than ever, and gradually, his relationship with Charlotte began to heal. One day, while visiting his granddaughter, Marcus looked at Charlotte with a mix of gratitude and regret. "Thank you, Charlotte, for giving me a second chance." She smiled, finally feeling that the scars of the past were healing. "Thank you for choosing to be here, Dad. Amelia deserves to know where she came from, and I want her to know a grandfather who has learned from his mistakes." Time passed, and Charlotte and Dylan watched their family grow with Marcus's quiet and genuine support. The cafe thrived, as did the life they'd built together. The past was finally behind them, and the future that once seemed distant and unreachable was now their reality. A life filled with love, family, and freedom. As Charlotte closed up the cafe one evening, watching Amelia smile, she knew that everything they had endured, all the pain and struggles, had been worth it. And do you think Marcus was doing the right thing with Charlotte? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know what you think. Your feedback means so much to us. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thank you for watching.